My name is Andrea Stanton. I'm 34. And last Christmas my mother-in-law slapped me across the face in front of 18 relatives. It wasn't because of the argument with my sister-in-law. It was because of the one true sentence I said during it. She called me trailer trash. She told me to take my daughter and get out. So, I did. No scene, no shouting. Just a 7-year-old's coat buttoned in the hallway and 2 bags in the trunk. And what I did the next morning, quietly from my phone before my coffee got cold, is the reason she was the one crying by 900 a.m. But here's what none of them knew yet. I had been carrying that whole family for 4 years, and I was about to set them down. Welcome back to Last Laugh Stories. This channel is where quiet women finally get loud. Stories about family, betrayal, and the moment somebody decides that enough is enough. If you have ever kept the peace at your own expense, this story is going to feel familiar. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe, because the ending of this one is worth staying for. The story of that slap starts with 2 houses. The first is mine, a 3-bedroom ranch on Alder Street that my husband Mark and I bought 9 years ago with a porch light that flickers and a kitchen table we found at an estate sale. I'm an ICU nurse, 12 years and nights and weekends. 12 years of holding strangers' hands at 2 in the morning. Mark is a quality engineer, steady and kind and allergic to conflict in a way I didn't fully understand until it mattered. The second house is his mother's, a white colonial on Burwood Lane, 20 minutes away, with hedges cut like they're afraid of her, and a china cabinet that gets dusted more often than some children get hugged. Sylvia Stanton has a phrase she deploys the way other people use punctuation. In this family, in thank you notes. In this family, I learned over 9 years of marriage. There was a seat for me at the table, but it was never quite mine. I was useful. Useful is different. I worked the holidays nobody wanted so I could afford to be generous. I remembered every birthday when my father-in-law passed 4 years ago. I was the one who sat with Sylvia through the funeral arrangements, while her own daughter was too devastated to choose a casket, but not too devastated to post about it. None of that ever moved my chair 1 inch closer to the family. There was a number attached to my seat at that table. An exact number with a $sign. And I'll get to it because it's the reason this story ends the way it does. But first, you need to know where I come from, because Sylvia never let me forget it. I grew up in Cedar Row Mobile Home Park, Lot 12, in a single wide with a stripe of rust under every window. My mother cleaned houses for a living. Nice houses, colonial houses, houses with china cabinets, and she raised me alone on coffee and stubbornness. I did homework at a fold-down table. I learned to stretch a pound of ground beef across 3 dinners. At 17, I started as a nursing aide at the county hospital, and I paid my way through nursing school in shifts and scholarships. And the day I pinned on my IRN badge, my mother cried into a dish towel because we didn't own handkerchiefs. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because it's the part of me that Sylvia found first. Mark brought me to Burwood Lane for the 3rd date, and I ambush of a dinner party. And I watched his mother do the math on me in real time. My shoes, my coat, my zip code. She was gracious the whole evening, which is worse than rude because you can't object to it. On the porch, she took both my hands and said warmly in front of everyone, "What an inspiring story you are, Andrea." A story, not a person. An inspiring story, the kind you tell to prove the system works. 9 years later, she had never once introduced me to anyone without working in where I came from. Sometimes it was dressed up as a compliment. It was never a compliment. It was a price tag she kept, taped to my sleeve so nobody would mistake me for full retail. The strange thing is I accepted it. Where I grew up, you learn early that belonging costs money. And I had been raised by a woman who paid that bill her whole life. I just didn't know yet how literal the bill was going to get. Christmas at Sylvia's was not a holiday. It was a production staged annually with a cast of 18 and a director who never once appeared to be directing. The Leo Jaina came down from the cabinet. Service for 24, hand-washed only. Older than the marriage that bought it. The menu was approved by Sylvia in November. The seating chart was never written down and never violated. Sylvia at the head, Brooke at her right hand, Mark at her left, and me. 9 years running at the far end between whichever cousins had children young enough to spill things. My daughter Lily, who was 7 that year, got a lecture in the car every Christmas Eve from nobody because I refused to give it and got it anyway the moment we walked in. Sit up straight, sweetheart. In this family, we don't put elbows on the table. We stayed overnight every year, all of us, because Sylvia liked the photograph of grandchildren on the staircase in matching pajamas. Liked the photograph. Mind you, the way a set designer likes a prop. And every year I packed our 2 duffel bags and smiled, and told myself it was one night that traditions matter. That Lily should know her grandmother. That's the sentence I want you to hold on to. Keeping the peace always sounds like love when you say it fast enough. That year, the production had a surprise in the second act. Brooke arrived 40 minutes late, glowing like a woman with an announcement, hugging everyone a beat too long. Big news, she kept saying, tapping her wine glass with one acrylic nail. Wait for dinner. Big news. In this family, we don't make scenes. Sylvia said it that very afternoon to a 7-year-old over a dropped fork. By 800 that night, the only person in 18 years to make a genuine scene at that table would be Sylvia herself. Before I tell you about dinner, you need 2 sentences from 2 different women, because my whole life happened between them. The first was my mother's. I was 9 at the fold-down table, and I'd asked why she wore her good blouse to clean the Albrights' house. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "We don't get a seat, Andy. We rent one." Then she went to work. She rented her seat in every room she ever entered, with extra shifts, with perfect manners, with never once asking for anything. And she died at 56, still current on the rent. And I don't think a single one of those rooms noticed she was gone. The second sentence came from Sylvia on my wedding day in the bridal room, while she fixed a pin in my hair that did not need fixing. None of this Mrs. Stanton business. She said, meeting my eyes in the mirror, "You'll call me Mom. In this family, we don't do formalities." And I did. For 9 years I called that woman Mom. I brought her soup when she had her knees done. I called her on Sunday evenings when Mark forgot. Some part of me, the 9-year-old at the fold-down table, believed that if I was useful enough, warm enough, cheap enough to keep, and expensive enough to lose, the title would eventually come true the way a rental sometimes turns into a home. I want to be honest with you because this story doesn't work if I'm not. Nobody forced me into that arrangement. I volunteered. Overfunctioning was the only language of love I'd ever been taught, and I was fluent. It took a slap across the face in front of my daughter to teach me the difference between being wanted at a table and being load-bearing. Dinner started at 6. The big news landed with the roast. Brooke stood, glass raised, and announced that she was opening her 3rd boutique. 3rd, because the first 2 had each lasted about as long as a gym membership. This time in the good part of Maple Glen. This time for real. And then she turned to the head of the table, glass tilted, and said the sentence that started everything. "And it's all thanks to Mom, who believed in me to the tune of the 15,000. Applause. Actual applause from the cousins. And I sat at the far end of that table and did what 12 years of night shifts have trained me to do, which is math under pressure. A 15,000 from a 62-year-old widow on a pension who, as far as the family knew, was comfortably set, but whose actual monthly mortgage had been quietly ought to paying out of my checking account for 4 years, to $940 a month, every month since the winter my father-in-law died, plus $260 a month for Brooke's car insurance, because there was a crisis once in the way that Brooke's life was a subscription service of crisis and temporary had turned into 48 a months. I hadn't told the cousins. I hadn't told anyone. That was the deal I'd made with my own pride. You don't get to resent what you volunteer for. So I sat there while the family toasted Sylvia's generosity, funded at Furs $200 a month by the trailer trash at the end of the table, and I might have swallowed it. I had 9 years of practice swallowing, except that Brooke, flushed with wine and victory, looked down the table at me and smiled and said, "Some people just talk about supporting family. Some of us are grateful enough to actually show up." She knew that was the thing. She knew exactly whose money it was. I didn't yell. I want the record straight on that because 18 people rewrote this scene within a week. I set down my fork and into the aftertoast. Quiet, I said calmly one true sentence. "Brooke, before we toast Mom's generosity, you should probably know the boutique money and your car insurance come from the same account my mortgage help comes from. Mine and Mark's. It's been our money for 4 years. I've never minded. But if we're doing gratitude tonight, let's at least address the envelope correctly. Silence has a temperature. That one dropped below freezing. Brooke's glass stopped halfway down. Mark, beside his mother, went very still and looked at his plate. I watched him choose the plate. That's the sentence I'd repeat in counseling months later. He chose the plate. And Sylvia rose from the head of the table with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has never once been contradicted in her own dining room. She walked the length of that table, past the liege, past her grandchildren, and she slapped me across the face hard, enough to turn my head in front of my daughter. "You'll always be trailer trash," she said, each word pressed flat, and even like a woman ironing. "Take your daughter and get out of my house." 18 people, and the only sound was the furnace. Lily's fork was still in her hand. I looked at my husband, one last full second of an offer, and he looked at his plate. So, I stood up. I thanked no one. I took my daughter's hand, buttoned her coat in the hallway, under the staircase photos of matching pajamas, brought down our 2 duffel bags, and walked out the front door of the house I had been paying for without one word of argument. I didn't argue. I packed our bags. The drive home to Alder Street was 20 minutes, and Lily fell asleep before the second stoplight, and my hand stayed steady on the wheel, because I was doing math again. My phone rang at 8:51 the next morning. The title of this story says, "Mom called me crying and I need you to understand who that is." Not my mother. My mother has been gone 6 years. Mom is what I called Sylvia Stanton at her own instruction for 9 years. The woman who told me we don't do formalities in this family was calling me at 8:51 the morning after she slapped me and put me out of her house like a stray. And she was crying. Real tears. I know the sound of real tears. I hear them for a living. For about 4 seconds, standing at my kitchen counter with my coffee going cold. My stupid loyal heart leaped at that sound. She's calling to apologize. 9 years of rent, and I still believed the lease might convert. Then she spoke. "Andrea, what you did last night. You've torn this family apart at Christmas. Do you understand that? Christmas." Brooke cried all night. The cousins keep calling me. My Christmas is in ruins. I said nothing. The crying gathered itself. And then wet and casual like at a hand slipping into a pocket came the actual reason for the call. "And listen, the mortgage draft comes out on the 3. With all this upset, I need to know that's not going to be affected. Tell me you're not going to be childish about the house." There it was. Not "I'm sorry." Not "Are you all right?" Not "Is Lily all right?" The 7-year-old who watched her grandmother strike her mother. The draft comes out on the 3rd. I stood in my kitchen and felt something in my chest go perfectly, surgically quiet. The same quiet I get when a monitor alarms and the room starts to panic, and my hands already know the protocol. "I'll text you," I said, and hung up and looked at my coffee, and it was still warm. That's how fast a heart can finish changing. It had taken 9 years and 1 phone call, and the coffee was still warm. Let me give you the anatomy of the number, because every family has one and nobody says it out loud. When my father-in-law died 4 years ago, it came out quietly in lawyer's office lighting that the colonial on Burwood Lane still carried a mortgage, and that his pension died with him mostly. Sylvia had a widow's benefit and her pride. Mark sat at our estate sale kitchen table doing sums with a pencil gray in the face, and I watched my husband drowning and did what I do. I said we can cover the house note for a few months until she gets sorted. $940 a month temporary. Then Brooke had her crisis of the season. A total lease elapsed policy and $260 a month of car insurance joined the ticket, also temporary. Nobody ever decided it would become permanent. That's how these things work. Gratitude has a short memory and invoices don't. Autopay is a miracle of mercy for everyone except the person funding it. The third of the month came. The money left. No one had to feel anything. 4 years, $200 a month, the 57,600, while I patched my scrubs and Sylvia bought service pieces for the Loge. And before you ask why I never renegotiated, I tried. 3 separate times. I asked to sit down and talk about the arrangement like adults, and I never got past the opening sentence. The first time, Sylvia developed a headache that required the room. The second, it was 3 weeks to Christmas, and in this family, we don't discuss money at the holidays. The third time, Brooke called mid-con conversation with a crisis, and the meeting simply never reformed. You cannot schedule a conversation with people whose way of life depends on the conversation never happening. I understand that now. Back then, I just kept paying rent on a seat at a table, where, as it turned out, the landlady was planning my eviction for free. Here is everything I did the morning, after Christmas in full, because the family version of this story has me scheming like a villain in a soap opera. I finished my coffee. I opened my banking app at the kitchen table, while Lily watched cartoons in her pajamas. I went to scheduled payments and I counted 2 of them, the 90/40 and the 260, which took 4 taps and about 90 seconds, less time than Sylvia had spent walking the length of her table to slap me. Then I wrote 1 text message and I revised it twice, not to sharpen it, but to file the edges off, and I sent it to Sylvia and copied Brooke because I don't do things behind backs. After last night, the financial support ends. The December payments were the last ones. This isn't punishment and it isn't a negotiation. It's just over. I wish you both well. Please don't call about this. I did not post anything. I did not text a single cousin. I did not tell my side to one human being except my husband. When he came downstairs 10 minutes later, hair flattened, holding his phone like it was ticking because his mother had already called him before 900 a.m. to report what I'd done. Notice the order of operations there. It matters later. And the first reply I personally received wasn't from Sylvia at all. It was 3 question marks, then a paragraph. And I'll spare you the paragraph. But the closing line I remember word for word, because people always tell you exactly what they're most afraid of dressed up as a prophecy about you. You just made the biggest mistake of your marriage. Not of my life, mind you, of my marriage. Even in a panic about her car insurance. Brooke knew precisely where the pressure point was, and precisely who could be counted on to stand on it. She was aiming at Mark before I'd rinsed my coffee cup. Mark and I had it out that night, after Lily was asleep in the kitchen in the fierce whispers of parents who've never learned to fight at normal volume. I'll give my husband this much. He never once defended the slap. He'd been horrified. He'd texted his mother that morning that what she did was unforgivable. And I believe he meant the word as much as a man can mean a word he has never once acted on. But about the money, he stood in front of the refrigerator and said, I just don't think we should weaponize it. That's her house, Andy. She's 62. And I heard myself answer in a voice I didn't recognize. Low and level. The voice underneath 9 years of pleasant. I'm not weaponizing anything. A weapon is something you swing at someone. I'm just putting down something I was never supposed to carry alone. There's a difference between attacking a person and no longer subsidizing her. He said she would lose the house. I said that was possible, and that it would not be my doing. The house had been losing itself for 4 years, and I had been the sandbag, and you cannot call it a flood the moment the sandbag stands up and walks away. He said she's my mother. And I said the thing I'd been circling for 9 years and never once landed on, I know. And I've been her second income and her favorite insult. Both at the same time since Lily was 3. You watched it happen at that table your whole life. And last night you looked at your plate. He flinched like I'd raised a hand to the hymn. He slept in the den. I lay awake in our bed doing what I do at 300 a.m. in the ICU, which is watched the numbers and refused to panic. And somewhere before dawn, I understood that the slap had only ended my arrangement with Sylvia. My arrangement with Mark, the one where I carried things so he'd never have to choose. That one was just now coming up for review. In January, a strange little door opened, and I want to show it to you now because everything at the end walks through it. Mark had brought home boxes from Burwood Lane months before. His father's things, the estate stuff nobody fights over, fishing licenses, cuff links, a shoe box of photographs. It fell to me to sort them. Obviously, useful is useful, even in exile. And in the shoe box between a picture of a fishing trip and somebody's christening, I found a black and white photograph of a laundromat. Suds and Suck, the sign said, hand-painted. Out front, a teenage girl in an apron, arms crossed, chin up, looking at the camera. The way you look at something you've decided to survive. It took me a full 10 seconds, and then it took my breath. The jawline, the eyes. Sylvia, I turned it over. Nothing but a year. 4 decades and change ago, in pencil. When I showed Mark, he did something I'd never seen in 9 years of marriage. He glanced at the kitchen, doorway first in his own house before he answered. Like her hearing reached across town. Grandma and Grandpa Kowalski ran a laundromat. He said quietly. Mom worked there through school. She doesn't talk about it. Dad kept that picture. She hated that he kept it. I stood at my estate sale table, holding the photograph of a girl in an apron with my mother-in-law's face. A girl who folded strangers' sheets after school. And I felt the floor of 9 years tilt a few degrees. You'll always be trailer trash, said flat and even, like a woman ironing. I had assumed the cruelty came from above, from a woman born on the hill, sneering down. It hadn't. It had come from somewhere much closer to Lot 12 than to Burwood Lane, and that made it stranger and worse. And though I didn't have the word for it yet, sadder. I put the photograph in my dresser drawer under the sweaters. Don't worry, it stays there. This isn't that kind of story. On the first warm Sunday in February, I did something I hadn't done since nursing school. I drove my daughter to Cedar Row. It's still there off Route 12, behind the tractor dealership, smaller than my memory of it, the way everything true is. And I parked across from Lot 12, where a different single-wide sits now, tan instead of white, with a pinwheel garden and somebody's bike on its side in the grass. Lily looked out the window, then at me waiting. This is where I grew up, I said. Lot 12 right there. My bedroom window was on that end. And I told her, not a sermon, just facts, the way you'd want them told to you. About the fold-down table where I did my homework. About my mother leaving before dawn in her good blouse to clean other people's houses. And what she used to say, we don't get a seat, we rent one. About how I'd believed her my whole life and how I had rented and rented and rented. Lily listened the way 7-year-olds do with her whole face. Then she asked the question that children ask because nobody has taught them not to yet. If you lived in a trailer, why does Grandma Sylvia hate trailers? And I looked at the pinwheels, spinning on somebody's rented lot. And I thought about a girl in an apron in front of a laundromat. And I gave my daughter the truest answer I had, because some people run away from a place their whole lives, baby. And anyone who reminds them of it feels like the road back. We sat a while. Then I said the sentence I had driven 20 member to say out loud with a witness. So it would count. We're done renting seats, Lily. Both of us from anybody. She nodded solemn as a judge and asked if we could get milkshakes. We got milkshakes. If you want to know the exact center of this story, it isn't a bank app or a slap. It's a parked car across from Lot 12. While I was buying milkshakes, Brooke was working. I have to hand it to my sister-in-law. She has never held a job for 2 consecutive years, but the woman could run a public relations firm. The family group chat, the big one, both sides, 40-odd people, got a version of Christmas in which I had ambushed a grieving widow at her own table with wild accusations about money and been asked to leave and retaliated by trying to put her on the street. The slap did not appear in this version. My name did, attached to the phrase after everything that was done for her. Then came the satellite campaigns. The church circle heard Sylvia might lose the house because of the daughter-in-law. The school pickup line heard we'd had a falling out, said with the eyebrows that do the real talking. An aunt of Mark's I had hosted for 8 Thanksgivings called me to say more in sorrow than in anger that family forgives Andrea, and that pride was a sin that punished the proud. I listened, thanked her for calling, and did not explain. That was the policy I'd set for myself at the kitchen table in December. And it cost me more than the money ever had. No rebuttals. No receipts posted to the group chat. No campaign of my own. If someone asked me directly face to face, they got one sentence. Sylvia hit me in front of my daughter, and I stopped paying her bills. Those are both true, and I'm at peace with both. And nothing else, no matter how the silence begged. Some people believed me. More didn't, or found it easier not to. I lost the church circle. I lost 2 school mom friendships I thought were real. On the nights it stung, I'd stand in Lily's doorway and watch her sleep and do the only math that still mattered. One witness, 7 years old. Learning what her mother does when the whole room decides the truth is inconvenient. Let the group chat have the rest. If you have ever been somebody's invisible autopay, the reliable one. The one who covers and smooths and pays and gets remembered exactly once a year in a toast that spends your money under someone else's for name. Stay with me because the next part is for you. And if you believe a woman can love her family and still close her wallet, subscribe. It helps more than you know. Now, March, the part Brooks the version of events had no chapter for. The truth about the house started coming up through the floorboards. A bank letter forwarded to Mark by a panicked Sylvia revealed that the mortgage on Burwood Lane had been 60 days delinquent twice before Christmas, before the slap, while my autopay was still running. The math didn't work until it did. My 90/40 had never gone to the bank at all. It went to Sylvia's account, where the note plus the taxes, plus the Loge lifestyle, plus withdrawals no widow's benefit, could sustain the boutique money among them had twice. Spent it before the bank got its share. My money hadn't been holding up the house. It had been holding up the performance of the house, and the performance was over budget for years. Meanwhile, Brooke, the 400 behind on a lease she couldn't cover without my 260, turned in her white SUV and posted something about simplifying her life. I felt no triumph reading any of it. I want that understood. This is the part the revenge story version gets wrong. Watching a 62-year-old woman's finances come apart is not satisfying, even when she slapped you. Even when every collapsing number is a number you predicted. What I felt was the cold, clean confirmation a nurse feels when the scan proves what she palpated months ago. I hadn't caused this. I had been concealing it. Mark read the bank letter 3 times at our kitchen table and said to the table, "It was always this bad." She never said a word. The months that followed were quiet the way a braced house is quiet. Spring, summer, a fall of unanswered letters. Then the week before Thanksgiving, he looked up from his phone and said, "She wants to see you. We need to back up 2 weeks because before the invitation, there was the fight. The one 9 years in the making, early November, our kitchen. Lily at a sleepover. Mark had been carrying his phone around like a pager all fall, fielding his mother's escalating panic. And that night he sat it down and said, "I need to ask you something and I need you not to explode." I told him I had never once exploded. Which was true and which he knew was true, and which somehow made it worse. The refinance wrote needs a second income on the application. Mom's asking, I'm asking, she's 62 Andy. It's one signature and this whole year calms down. She's my mother. Can't you just bend once and there it was at last in my own kitchen? The family position delivered by my husband. Not defend the slap. Nobody would ever defend the slap. The slap had simply evaporated from the record. Just bend, just sign, just resume. I looked at this man I have loved since I was 25, and for the first time I saw the whole machine of him. A boy raised at that table in that seating chart, who had learned that peace was something women produced for Sylvia the way the kitchen produced dinner. He wasn't cruel. He was afraid, and he'd been afraid so long he called it being reasonable. I'm not signing, I said quietly. And I'm only going to say this once, so please hear all of it. 9 years I have bent so this family wouldn't have to. I bent at every Christmas, every group chat, every toast. The bending is done. I will go to counseling with you tomorrow, tonight. I want this marriage. But I will not co-sign the stage set. And if you make me choose between being your wife and being her funding, you need to understand that you are the one making me choose. He didn't answer. He looked at his plate then, and I will love him for this one motion longer than he'll ever know. He pushed the plate away. The person who finally handed me the key to Sylvia was Lorraine, Mark's great-aunt by marriage, 81. The only member of that family who had ever once asked me a question about myself and stayed for the answer. She called in mid-November, asked me to tea in her overheated apartment, and got straight to it the way only the very old are allowed to. They're telling it all wrong. What happened at Christmas, she said, pouring. I was there. I saw where the hand came from. Then she told me where the hand came from. Not the arm, the decades. Sylvia Kowalski, the laundromat on Vine Street, the apron, the smell of other people's wash. A scholarship girl who studied the catalog, families like a second curriculum. How they set a table, how they wrote a thank you note, how they said certain words. She married up, Lorraine said. Without malice, married a good man from a good street, and spent 40 years sanding the Kowalski off herself plank by plank, until even her own children didn't know where the laundromat had been. The china, the seating chart, the in this family business. That's not old money, honey. That's a woman guarding a border. Old money doesn't check passports. It doesn't have to. Lorraine set down the pot and looked at me with those pale, sharp eyes. Your mother-in-law has been running from a trailer park her whole life, her version of one. And you. She smiled kindly, terribly. You just happened to look like the road back. Every scrub shirt, every night shift, every story about your mother and her cleaning jobs. She can't be in a room with you without hearing quarters going into a machine. I drove home in the dark with the heater rattling and understood finally that I had spent 9 years being slapped by a mirror. It didn't excuse one thing. Understanding never does. But it told me exactly what was going to be sitting across from me at that reconciliation dinner, and exactly why it would be holding a folder. The invitation itself arrived not through Mark in the end, but directly the first text Sylvia had sent me since December that did not mention a payment date. I read it standing in the break room at 4 a.m., between a code and a chart, which is the correct lighting for reading Sylvia. Andrea, this year has hurt all of us, and I have had time to think. I would like the family to sit down together before the holidays. Antonelli's Saturday at 7. There are things I need to say to you, and I hope you will let me say them properly. Mom, properly at a restaurant. I want to walk you through what I saw in that text because 9 years in that family had made me fluent in its true language. A restaurant meant witnesses and no scenes. My comm was being prehired for the evening. Before the holidays meant the mortgage's holidays, not mine. And Mom signed at the bottom like a card she was playing rather than a thing she was. Meant the stakes were high enough that every piece was going on the board, including me at 9 years old. Sorry, including the me who for 9 years had wanted nothing on this earth so much as for that word to be true. That's the part I won't dress up. Reading it. Some tired tenant in my chest stirred and whispered. Maybe this time, maybe she says it, really says it, and you get the family after all. Hope is the last bill collector, and it always knows your address. I texted back within the hour because policies exist for the moments your chest starts whispering will come. 2 conditions. Mark is there and whatever is said stays at that table. No group chat before or after. If that works, we'll see you Saturday. A thumbs up arrived instantly, which told me she'd been watching the phone. Then a minute later, one more message, and I'll let you decide what it was. Wear something nice. And Telly is elegant. The week before the dinner. 2 things happened that set my spine for it. First, the group chat, which I was no longer in, but which has never once contained a secret, produced its final artifact. A cousin with a conscience screenshotted it to me. Brooke, to 40 relatives, riffing on the theme of the evening to come. Mom's being the bigger person again. Personally, I don't know how you apologize to someone for telling the truth. Once trailer, always trailer. You can put it in Scrubs, but you can't teach it family. 12 little laughing reactions. I read it twice, felt the old scowled move through me and pass, and did not respond, because by then I finally understood something about Brooke. She wasn't cruel for sport. She was the only person in that family more afraid of the money ending than Sylvia was. She just always let her mother do the enforcing. Terror has a pecking order too. Second thing, the one that mattered. Lily came home from school quiet, and at bedtime it surfaced. A girl in her class, daughter of one of Brooke's boutique friends, because Maple Glen is a small pond, had told her at recess, "My mom says your mom grew up poor, and that's why your grandma doesn't love her." 7 years old, delivering it carefully, watching my face to see how bad it was. I lay down next to her on the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling stars we'd stuck up there when she was 4. "Is it true?" she asked. "2 parts of it," I said. "I did grow up poor, and Grandma Sylvia does struggle to love me. But baby, those 2 things aren't connected the way that girl's mom thinks. And here's what's true at our house. We don't get embarrassed about Lot 12. Lot 12 is where Mama learned everything that keeps you safe." She was quiet then. "We don't rent seats." "Correct," I said. "We don't." Saturday came. I wore my good blouse. "I want to show you what I brought to Antonelli's, because it's the whole difference between revenge and a boundary, and it fit in one manila envelope." Friday night after shift, I sat at the kitchen table and prepared the way I prep for a hard family meeting at the hospital. The ones where you have to tell people a true thing they will hate you for, and you bring them in writing everything that can actually help, because the news and the help have to arrive in the same conversation, or the family only hears the news. Into the envelope went the number for the county's nonprofit financial counseling office, the one that specializes in seniors, with the name of the intake coordinator I had already called to confirm they had openings. The names of 2 realtors who handled downsizing for older homeowners, both vetted. One of whom sold a colleague's mother out of a too-big house and into a good 2-bedroom with money left over. A printout on the state's property tax relief program for seniors, which Sylvia almost certainly qualified for, and almost certainly had too much pride to have looked up. That was all. No spreadsheet of 4 years of payments. I had one and left it in the drawer. No letter, no speech. Mark watched me seal the envelope and asked carefully what it was. "It's what I'm still willing to give," I said. "Help finding the way." "Everything except the wallet." He was quiet a moment and then said, "She's going to ask for the wallet." "I know," I said, and licked the envelope. Here is the thing I'd finally learned, and it took me 34 years and 1 slap. You can love people all the way through a no. The no's and the love can sit in the same envelope, but only if you stop confusing being drained with being devoted. They feel identical from the inside, and they are not the same thing at all. The night before the dinner, my husband told me a story I'd never heard, and it belongs here. We were in bed with the lights off, which is when the true things come out of him, and he said, I was 9, little league. I struck out with the bases loaded and cried on the bench, and Mom drove me home in total silence. And when we pulled in, she said, "In this family, we don't embarrass ourselves in public. Do you understand me?" 9. I'm 36 years old, Andy, and I've been 9 at that table my whole life. You know what I felt when she slapped you? I waited. The furnace ticked. "Relief," he said, and his voice cracked on it. For about 1 second, because for once it wasn't me getting corrected, and then I saw Lily's face, and I've been sick about that second every day since. That's what I looked down at the plate to hide. Not agreement, shame. I lay there in the dark, holding my husband's hand, while 30 years of that dining room moved through him. It did not fix things. One confession doesn't refinance 9 years. I'd learned that much about balances, but it told me who'd be sitting next to me at Antonelli's. Not a wall and not yet a shield. A man in the middle of the longest walk of his life from his mother's right hand to his wife's side, going as fast as his fear allowed. Counseling, he said into the dark. I found somebody. First opening's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. I already booked it. I said, just okay. You don't cheer a man for reaching shore while he's still in the water. Saturday, 700 came up fast. Antonelli's on the square, white cloths, low amber light, the murmur of other families having easier evenings. Sylvia was already seated when we arrived in her best silk, pearls on. And on the chair beside her, squared to the table's edge like a play setting, sat a blue folder. 7 of us, Sylvia, Brooke, Lorraine, Mark, me, Lily, with her paper and crayons and the blue folder, which I am counting as a guest because it had clearly been given a seat. We ordered. We performed the small talk of families in triage. And then Sylvia sat down her fork, touched her napkin to her lips, and did the thing I had stopped believing she could do. Andrea, what I did at Christmas was wrong, not the argument. My hand. I struck you in front of your child in my home, and I have heard the sound of it every day since. My mother would have been ashamed of me. Her voice caught on. Mother, caught on the something real. I know the sound of real. I am sorry. I am asking you to forgive me. The table went still. Lorraine watched me over her glasses. Lily had stopped coloring. And I want to be honest about what happened in my chest, because this is the part of the story where I'm the one on the table. It worked. Years of wanting swelled up under that apology like water under a door. My eyes stung. I heard myself start to say something soft. In this family, we don't make scenes. And here was Sylvia Stanton making the opposite of a scene, making an amends in silken public. And every tired tenant in me stood up and reached for the pen before there was a pen. Then there was a pen. She reached to the chair beside her, lifted the blue folder, and slid it across the white cloth with 2 fingers. Gently, the way you deal a card you've been holding all night. Which is why, she said, I wanted us to talk about the house as a family. The folder held a refinance application, flagged with little arrow stickers where signatures belonged. The bank would restructure the note, lower payment, longer term, with a qualified co-signer on the application. My income was already penciled into the worksheet, not Mark's. Mine, the nurse's, the steady one, the one that had qualified for 4 years without ever being asked. Under it, a typed page, and I recognized Brooke's font choices, a family plan in which the autopay resumed temporarily until Mom is stabilized. Brooke leaned in, warm as a loan officer. It's what family does, Andy. You of all people know that. I looked at the stickers, pointing to my name. And then Sylvia did the one thing I never saw coming. The thing that broke my heart for her at the exact moment. She was reaching for my wallet. Her hand resting on the folder's edge was trembling. And she said so quietly the table almost missed it. I cannot go back to being nobody, Andrea. You don't know what that's like. The silk, the pearls, the liege, the seating chart, the 40 years, all of it swaying on that one sentence like a house on one nail. Lorraine closed her eyes, and I said just as quietly, I do actually. I grew up there. Sylvia looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time in 9 years. And for one long second, the border guard and the laundromat girl were both sitting in her chair, and neither of them could speak. That second is the closest she and I have ever come. It changed nothing about what I did next. I want that understood. Understanding is not a payment plan. Here is what signing would have bought, and I priced every line of it right there at that table, because I am my mother's daughter and we do our math before we pay. Signing bought back Mom. It bought Sunday dinners, and a grandmother for Lily and the group chat, turning warm overnight. The aunts calling to say they always knew I was good people. It bought Mark's shoulders coming down off his ears for the first time in a year. It bought peace, the whole room full of it. Immediate gift wrapped, mine to hand out like Christmas morning. All I had to do was resume being load-bearing and call it belonging. The same lease retyped in a nicer font. I looked down the table at my daughter. She'd gone back to her crayons. Folding her napkin into the shape I recognized, A paper star, the kind we make at home, 7 years old at a white tablecloth, learning at this exact minute whether anyone meant her to or not, what a woman's yes costs, and who is allowed to charge her for it. And I heard the whole chorus at once. My mother saying we rent our seats. Sylvia saying I can't go back to being nobody. Brooke saying it's what family does. And underneath them all, quiet as a monitor, the question I'd been refusing to read for 9 years. If the payments are the only thing keeping your chair at this table, what exactly have you been calling love? I reached out and closed the folder. The little arrow stickers disappeared into the blue like fish going under. No, I said gently, completely. And then, because a no without a door is just a wall, I lifted my envelope from my bag and set it where the folder had been. I'm not signing, and the payments aren't coming back, I said in the voice I use at 300 a.m., when a room needs one calm person, and I have decided it will be me. Not out of anger. I've done my anger. This is just the truth. I spent 4 years and 57,600 renting a seat in this family, and the rent bought me the far end of the table, and a slap in front of my child. The wallet is closed. It stays closed. Brooke made a sound like a kettle starting. I slid the envelope forward. This is what I am offering instead. And it's real. The Senior Financial Counseling Office, Marion at Intake, is expecting your call. I set that up Thursday. 2 realtors who do nothing, but help people your age trade a house. That's drowning them for a home that isn't the property tax relief program you qualify for. I will drive you to every one of those appointments myself if you want me there. Help finding the way every time you ask money. Never again. Sylvia's chin came up. The border guard reassembling. You would put me out of my own house, she said, voice rising with each word. You of all people. And I said the last thing I'd walked in carrying the sentence I'd been 34 years building. You're right that I'm from the trailer park, Sylvia. That's exactly why I know the difference between a home and a stage set. I grew up in a home. What happened next? 18 relatives would have paid money to see and will never believe. Sylvia Stanton, in this family, we don't make scenes, stood up in the middle of Antelli's and made one. The cracked voice, the napkin thrown down, the you ungrateful, the whole dining room turning. Brooke was up beside her, gathering coats and fury. And Mark, my husband, the boy from the bench, did not stand. He stayed in his chair and he put his hand on the back of mine and he said, Mom, Andy's told you what's on offer. I think you should take the envelope. They left without the envelope. Lorraine caught up to us in the parking lot, wrapped in her enormous coat, and took my face in both cold hands like a woman, appraising a grandchild. 40 years I watched that table, she said. Tonight's the first time anybody ever left it with their spine. Then she kissed Lily, demanded we visit, and was driven home. In the car, Lily fell asleep mid-sentence about the bread sticks. The group chat, I'm told, detonated on schedule. I never read it. There is a version of me in that chat who deserves whatever she gets, and I've stopped attending her trial. What I remember from that night is quieter. Mark stood in Lily's doorway a long time after we carried her in, watching her sleep, the paper star from the restaurant still in her fist. Then he came down to the kitchen where I sat over a cup of tea I wasn't drinking. And he sat across from me at our estate sale table, and he looked at me, not at his plate, at me, and said, Tuesday the counseling I'm going. I'd go tomorrow if they'd take me. We sat with that. Somewhere across town, a blue folder was riding home unsigned. And a woman in her best silk was learning the thing I'd learned at 9 years old in Lot 12, that the rent always comes due, and that it is never, ever the tenant who sets the price. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like a nurse at the end of a code that went the only way it could. Emptied out, steady-handed, and unsure who to be now that the alarms had stopped. People kept asking me that winter if I regretted it. It took me until the next Christmas to give my whole answer. Here is the answer. 2 Christmases after the slap, and it fits in one kitchen. Christmas dinner at our house on Alder Street. 5 places at the estate sale table set with 3 patterns of dishes that don't match and never will because they came one box, at a time from 3 different thrift stores, and every plate got chosen by a 9-year-old on purpose. Lily's paper stars hang on tape loops from the light fixture. Mark actually cooked, prawn and all, and is at the sink now doing dishes, a year of Tuesday counseling in his posture. A man who has learned that peace is something you make with your own hands, or it isn't peace. Lorraine holds court with a plate on her knee. The Colonial on Burwood Lane sold in the spring for enough, as it turned out, to clear the note and fund a tidy 2-bedroom apartment near Brook, where I am reliably informed. Sylvia tells the neighbors her daughter-in-law broke up the family. I've made my peace with being that story in her building. Her building is small and getting smaller, and some walls you cannot lower for a person. You can only stop paying to keep them raised. Mark visits her one Saturday a month alone. That is his road, to walk at his speed. And I packed the leftovers he brings her without comment, because the no was never aimed at soup. And in December a card came addressed to me alone. Brooke's handwriting, no return address. One line where the printed greeting should be. The insurance thing, I get it now. That's all. Not an apology, not a bridge, a crack in a wall. Which is how every door in history got started. I taped it to the refrigerator next to Lily's spelling test. My mother rented her seat in every room her whole life, and the rooms forgot her. My daughter watched her mother get slapped, and then she watched what came after. I own my seat now. So will she. I used to think love meant being so useful they couldn't afford to lose you. Now I know that anyone who prices your seat at the table was never offering you a home. And the most loving word a worn-out woman can learn to say is a calm, complete, unexplained no. That's my story. 1 slap, 2 calendar autopays, and a kitchen where nobody rents their seat. If you've been someone's invisible autopay, the reliable one, the one who covers and never counts, take this as your sign to finally look at that bill. Share this with a woman who keeps the peace at her own expense. Drop a comment below. I read everyone. Hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next.